Hi, welcome to this video. We're just continuing on, maybe answering a couple of the questions that we didn't have a chance to before. And I'd like to introduce Jeremy from the 5-Pencil Method team, and he can go ahead and let you know what some of those things are that you're interested in.
Yes, thank you, Darrell. It's great to be here again. I'm glad to be talking to you. And maybe you saw that survey we sent out. We sent it out last week, and we sent it out because we wanted to gauge how you feel about drawing animals. We wanted to know your struggles, your victories, and even some of your fondest memories of drawing a pet or an animal. And what we found from this survey was that an overwhelming majority of you struggle with drawing fur. It was kind of a passionate topic. People were really frustrated with drawing fur. And in the last video, Darrell sat down and addressed that. He told you how to draw realistic fur. And today we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that. And we wanted to cover how to draw the realistic, unique markings that make up your pets, your animals, the ones that really set them apart and endear them to you. So to get us started, I want to read a few of your responses. These are things that we actually heard back from you after the survey. And I think it'll give you a little idea of what else people are struggling with. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. And the first one, someone said, "My biggest challenge is drawing white fur. Creating the most realistic shadows beneath the fur while being sure the light direction is consistent is another problem. I find it most difficult showing detail in areas that are reflecting light." Okay? And another frustration was getting the markings of the animal just right. Each little critter has a specific design on its face or within the fur that defines that animal. So they're really interested in knowing how to draw those unique characteristics that make each animal stand out. And the last one I have here for you, they said, getting the fur to look realistic is a real frustration. And when drawing a pet with so many markings, like my brindle greyhound, is there any easier way to do it without drawing each and every one of those 1,000 lines? So, Darrell, I think that's a great question. What needs to happen to draw different colors of fur? Do we need multiple pencils? Do they need to turn to colored pencils? And what would you recommend for capturing those unique markings and those patterns that really set each animal apart? Hoping you can clear that up for us.
Well, first of all, I think it is very important to go ahead and capture some of those character traits, some of those little characteristics that make your pet unique. It's no different than capturing, the shape of a nose or the type of an eye or the smile or frown on a face. There's different things that are going to communicate what we're trying to draw. But in animals, it seems like sometimes we probably look at it a little bit like, it isn't that critical. And yet it is. Those are things that are going to tell the difference between this cat and another. And so I like to pay attention to those things. Let me just go ahead. I'll take the cat that we did in class and in the studio class, and let me just go ahead and reference a couple things. I can point to the fact that if I am trying to lay this cat out, I want to basically treat some of these lines that are the character of the cat, the markings, just like I would if I was placing the eye or looking at the angle of the ear or how everything is spaced in between, proportionally between the nose. And these are all really important things. And I always talk about how things line up in a number of ways, not only the angles and what does it maybe line up with so that you can look visually at your subject and or lay it out like this, but also things that go horizontally. And if I look straight up, I have a pretty good idea where to make this. If I am looking horizontal, did I say horizontal or vertical? Anyway, as I'm looking up vertical, I can see how it lines up with this. And if I'm looking horizontal, I can see where something else may line up. Let me go ahead and just see if I can pull over. Let's see. We basically laid this cat out. I always like to do this with a major reference point, whether I'm imagining it in my mind as I'm looking at my subject or I create it on my drawing initially. This helps me now start seeing something very similar to the grid. Even if I was to leave it like this, I would have an opportunity to say, okay, this is a little higher than this is, and I can start forming different parts and seeing where it intersects a line. Well, the same way is I can see that this line is going down in between these two marks. I can see, quite a bit of the spacing here and the angle. I can see that if I went from the ear down to here, this is maybe fanning out just a little bit more. Look how it actually, some of these angles just naturally go out like spokes of the wheel. But I can see how it relates to the eye, maybe this marking here. Some of these may be very common markings. There's a lot of cats that have very similar markings, but I still want to catch the uniqueness of this cat. So this is a little above and this is a little down, and I want to pay attention to the angles because our mind is always looking at things like this to see, and it understands exactly how it's wrapping around the form of the cat. And so it tells us a lot more than we think about perspective and recognizing again the uniqueness of this cat. And so often this is what I will do. And then when I am drawing, I will treat this like a characteristic. I may not necessarily put the one in between, this one right here, in right now. I may not put this in right away. Some of the first ones I might put in are maybe the one on either side. And I know I'm going back down to this central point that I initially established on my drawing. And then I would start, because it's darker, with a little more value, designating it just like I would if I was drawing an eye. And this helps me to be able to start forming the proportions with that in mind. And so I can have the proper placing. Instead of drawing the whole cat out and then hoping that I have everything correct, and then I can start adding in a few of these things. And I always like to follow the rules of light. I think it's so important that I can establish depth and also form again in my mind the fact that this proportion is really developing well, because there's darker places and darker places within the darker places. And so naturally, I want to start going with some of these places that are going to be more dominant, just as I would the eye. As I said, I don't want to go to finish. I want to just start sketching it in. Like I said yesterday, I may do a more general, freer interpretation of the fur, and I can come in here with some and pay attention to the direction. Really important. Some of those characteristics on this cat wouldn't be the same if this is like this, and I just say, oh, well, there was a mark somewhere over here, and I'll just put it out over there like that. Well, it isn't going to work. And so it's just a matter of teaching yourself to observe. And then you gradually, as you start putting in something that is darker, like the stripes, I want to just allow for it. Try to get the character and the angle of it. And then later on, I can come in and I can now start designating maybe a few places that are a little darker within a dark area. I know that's probably pretty small. Maybe I need to enlarge it. I always go the wrong direction too. But anyway, I can start picking out places that are a little deeper. Or I guess if I wanted to, and I could take a chance, I could maybe establish a few of those things first and then gradually start building the fur within that stripe. But again, my tapered stroke really helps. It helps me to have a sharp pencil so that I can establish where is that clean edge that I want to go past and into the depth of something. And I don't want it to just be something like a pasted on form, just something that was a flat stroke on the fur. So it's really important for me to follow, again, those rules of light, because everything that goes to where there's less light will become darker, and everything that is in where there's more light will be lighter. And so we have those variations all through here. We have places where there's a little bit more of a light hair over the top of the dark, and I have a chance to take that out with my eraser. As I talked to you yesterday, I can come back in and I can take, let's just go ahead and make it a little more solid. I'll just put some value in here quick. Especially, there's one more thing that's really nice, because I love to draw with my eraser as well. I like to create, as much of the major detail and some of the textures as I go, instead of trying to come back in later. But there is also the opportunity for me to create that hair that may come into and break that color, that value that I had there. So that's the same thing that's happening in some places like this, where I'm actually taking an eraser back over if I want to. Or I can come in here and I can create my little V, and it makes sure that I have that opportunity to go past those. But if I just went and I tried to outline something, it just really wouldn't work for me. I want it to be able to have that character and texture that is going to say, oh, this is fur, instead of, again, having almost like a piece of tape just pasted on, and it's like a collage. I want to have things integrated and overlapping and show that wonderful depth when I'm doing these stripes and characteristics. But you can see how necessary it is, and yet if we pay attention, if we have our eye developing here, we can come out here with a little bit of an indication of where this is. And then after a little while, I can come back in here and pay attention to the direction of the fur. And then as I make this a little bit more dense, I can come out over it with an eraser stroke. And my as I said yesterday, my kneaded eraser is just always right here handy. I just use it whenever I want to, and I can form that blade, and it can be pretty sharp, and I want it to be substantial enough that it doesn't just flop over. But it's amazing what you can do when you have that opportunity to come in and now create that little streak through. Oh, I was out of frame there. But when you come back in and you create that streak, now you want to remember this. There's several things that I really want to be careful of when I'm creating anything, and that is I don't want to put too much pressure. I love layering and building up, and some people go, oh, but it takes so long. But sometimes it takes much longer to try and repair something that you can't get all the graphite off from. You can't make your changes like you would like to. And so in that way, sometimes you've wasted a whole piece of work. So I like to be careful and plan it as I go, and so that I can come up with the detail and all of the depth that I want, and do it slowly so I can see overall what I need to maybe change. Because again, as I said before, and have said so often, it's really important for us to be able to to see the whole thing in balance and composition. And as we start building things, we're going to start seeing that maybe I did have a stripe off just a little bit. But you can see how many of these characteristics are so important. I have a tendency to count. I guess maybe some people might say that's obsessive compulsive or whatever, but I can pretty well capture the uniqueness of that particular pet. And so I'm going to maybe count how many of these little dots are for where the whiskers went in. I can make sure that I'm not just putting a whole row without any thought of how many there would be to represent this cat, because it's all part of the character and how many wrinkles you have in the forehead of a person. You don't want to just say, well, it's got wrinkles, I'll just put a whole bunch of them in there. Or you wouldn't just put one and just have it like it's a great big huge obnoxious distraction in the middle of a forehead. And so I treat the cats and the dogs and the different animals, whether it's a bird with different color feathers or whatever, in pretty much the same way. We're working on a fish right now for our studio project, and this is pretty much the same thing. Once we get the form started, then we start figuring out, well, where in the world would that character band of dark go through? And so it almost looks like it's a little bit of a bandit, somewhat like a raccoon with the stripes on its fur in just the right place. It looks like it's a little bit of a bandit character. But this really helps to be able to pay attention and have this in just the right place. And I can see how it intersects the eye, how the curve goes, where it starts wrapping around. And because we don't have a flat cat, we want to be able to show that we're wrapping all these things around a basically round object, and that is the cat's head. And so we have light and dark that helps us. At one end of a stripe, it may be a little lighter than it is in another place. It may be a little more intense here, not only because of the color of the cat, but because it's going around to the brighter side of the face. You might find that if you were to compare this value with this value, you might find that this is much darker because in its surrounding area, the set of values you have to work with still need to show that this is a little darker than this, and maybe a little darker than this, and this is maybe a little darker yet, but maybe it isn't near as dark as it is over here because this contrasts with lighter places. And so the contrast is what gives you the opportunity to really, or, it becomes the challenge. You want to not have everything the same value in many places, otherwise you won't have that opportunity for depth. So I'm always thinking again about how light works and where is the stripe in relationship to the cat, as far as the light is hitting on it. And so anyway, there's a lot of things. I like to try to share as much as I can, while I'm drawing with everybody on a video. And yet if you keep thinking about at least as many elements as you can, maybe it's just one, maybe it's two, and incorporate those into your drawing, you'll gradually get to the place where you're saying, oh wow, I'm going to try another aspect of capturing my pet, and see if I can really take into consideration the balance of value or the angle of a line, and how it relates vertically with the eye, and where is it? How does it relate in as far as the angle? Is this angle different than this one? And just start noticing those things, because you are going to have the opportunity to express what you draw so much better as you start forming the habit and seeing the benefits of being able to incorporate one more thing and one more thing and one more thing to capture the uniqueness of the subject you're drawing. And it sure adds a lot more fun to drawing.
Now, Darrel, I think that what you explained covers a lot of this, but one specific frustration I've heard from people over and over is, how do I draw an animal that's completely white? Like here I am using this dark graphite pencil, and I want to draw something that is a pure snow white. So how would you recommend going about a challenge like that?
Well, I've gone over a lot of these things in the classes where I would still, if I can, I like to try to sketch things out and start getting a feel for my shape as much as I can, and so I'm going to be paying attention again where that spot is and how everything relates to that. But then what I'm going to do when I start putting in my a little bit of a texture, or those shadowed areas, those places that are a little past, or they are past something, I want to be able to have a sharp pencil, and I want to, if I can, lightly use my 2B pencil. And so then when I create this, I'm still able to see the texture, the edges, and the things I need. But now I have an opportunity, because I'm using a softer pencil with a little more lead, I can now lightly put these things on, and yet I have some extra lead that I can brush around. And so when I have a chance to do a whole area, then I will go ahead and I'll brush it, and it is actually creating some tone in some of those lighter areas. And it is really surprising. I'm not going to be able to put enough tone on here right now to be able to demonstrate it necessarily. But as I am creating this tone in here, I am allowing the darker places to stay darker, and yet it's giving me some areas in here where I can create a little more contrast. Let's see if we did put anything in here. Oh my, we did. Can you see that brighter area there? I hope you can. I know it's awful close. You can see how we have some tone in here, and we're able to, even in the light area, create something that is a little lighter. And then I have a chance to come in and I can brush it again. This is very similar to what we do with a white beard or somebody that's got very blonde hair. Every time I brush that extra lead around, it still saves the values that I created. And you can see how I'm starting to create a cast in here probably. But now I get the chance to come in with a whole another line that is going to be brighter than the rest of it. And so I can create some depth even in that. Now, one of the things that's really important to understand is that you want to work within the set of values that are given to work with. Let's just say this cat is very, very light in comparison to this photo. Well, I might have a very light cat, but still I want to be able to show that it's still got a round head and still show that this is a little darker than something that's over here on the bright side. And as much as possible, I want to be patient and build up my values so that even though I'm working with a very limited range, I can go ahead and still show some contour. And if I brush it, I can pull out some nice little highlights here and there. I can brush it again, and I can pull out maybe an individual hair. I can brush it again and pick out the apex of that. That would be the brightest point within that hair's streak. Just like these whiskers here, some of these are going to be a little brighter in certain places. So that helps me establish curve and keeps things from going flat. And then I have the wonderful opportunity, to create some contrast, because there's always something in your drawing that's going to be darker. And in this case, we have the eyes, we have the nostrils, the insides of the nostrils. I can create areas that are a little darker to show, again, contour and dimension and depth. And it gives me the opportunity to contrast it with these other areas, so that even though I don't have a whole lot of value, I'm communicating that it's a very light cat. And boy, I've seen some pretty dynamic photos and pieces of art where there's been a white cat, and yet those eyes just pop out, and it's just so powerful. And I don't necessarily suffer a thing that I didn't have a lot of value, but everybody knows it's a white cat. And if I can go ahead and be careful with my values, I can show that there's still contour and depth. Sometimes it's necessary to maybe have brushed in past, maybe into the background, so that you can create, something along the edge. If it's white hair and it's bright, I can still maybe show that I have light hair coming out. Now, you may not be able to see this, but this is exactly what is going to happen. I'm going to be able to create a little bit of a silhouette. I hope that even though this isn't very dark, you can see how some of this is going to still show up. And even though it's subliminal and it's very light, you can still see that I'm going to be able to create a lighter edge to the fur against maybe just a slight tone. Maybe it's going to be a little bit more of a tone. But I can also do it by making sure that whatever's bright here is the lightest value I have on my paper besides the paper. I can create a tone. I can make sure that it's a little darker than the paper. And then I have other things in my drawing, like the eyes and those kinds of things, that will help me be able to demonstrate that there is indeed some value in here. And when I keep value in the lightest areas, which I always like to try to do, it keeps things from going flat, because you'll see all these little ranges of value. And so even white, if you had a white shirt on, there's still going to be some light direction. There's still going to be places that are in the shadow areas. There's still going to be contour. And whether it's a lady's blouse, or whether it's a cat's fur, whether it's a towhead person with white hair, and they're in the bright light, you can still find ways, and that's the fun part of drawing, is find ways of conveying that instead of just getting frustrated and saying, well, it's just not going to work. But I still like to draw, building my values slowly and taking advantage of the contrast that I do have, because this helps me tell the story of this. If this is darker and it's contrasting and this isn't very dark, then this tells me right now this is a very, very light furred cat. And so those are the ways I can take advantage of, the fact that there's white on a particular animal, and I can now demonstrate that, keeping those things in mind. I don't like to go too dark, so some of these things may appear darker often because they are contrasting with something lighter. But I always like to have something a little darker in reserve, as some of you may know, so that I can show the deepest part of this and still show more dimension than you might have thought you'd have in a dark area. You can use a lot of common sense and realize that there's a little darker place within a nostril. It isn't going to be dark from here all the way out to here, let's say. And that gives me an opportunity, again, to show a range and always have something in reserve. And that contrast, again, is going to help me be able to show that this is a white muzzle on this cat. And I can show all these little variations. And I can come back in and I can take out a few little hairs. And keeping my eraser sharp, and I use an X-Acto knife on these Mono Zeros, or using this blade, I can carefully come in and I can just take a little streak here and a little streak there, and making sure that it's somewhat like the tapered stroke, and so that I can have a gliding on and gliding off. So again, it isn't just a flat streak going through, and you can do that erasing something as much as you can when you are making a pencil stroke. So some of those things are things I keep in mind, and even though it's a white cat and I'm thinking, I'm going to have to be really careful, I'm going to really have to manage my values very well, you can do it, especially if you start practicing with that idea of being patient and doing maybe with a little softer pencil so that you can have a little extra graphite and utilize your brush. And this is going to really help. Now, again, for those of you that don't know, this is a Lang nickel. They're very, very inexpensive, and they're made out of camel hair. I think it's probably one of the softest, brushes that we could have. And the softer it is like this, and the more fibers there are, the more hairs there are, I think it helps us to be able to do a little better job of brushing things in. And besides that, it's flat. And so I have a lot of control. I can use an edge, I can use a corner, and I don't have to worry about it being some round, big round brush or something that doesn't have a real nice form or is too big. And I can come into little areas, like so, and not brush into areas I don't want to have it brushed into. Or I can come into larger areas if I want to brush it into the background, like I was talking about, so that I can create some of those white hairs against the background. I can still do that and not have it look blotchy and just uneven. So the brush makes a huge difference. Using, again, the softer pencil, having your pencil sharp all the time so that you can always know when you're trying to go past something. And that's the tricky thing about fur, or things that people don't think about, is we need to have clean edges, even though there's many of them. But it isn't hard when you keep your pencil sharp and use the tapered stroke. Of course, you realize I'm partial to that. I use it all the time. And then if I ever deviate from that, it's because I have something else to create. I don't have to worry about a clean edge because my pencil's always sharp. I maintain the sharpness too by making sure that I'm at this angle and it is always sweeping on and off of my paper. And I'm rotating this around gradually as I go. And so it's always self-sharpening. And it's rare that I ever have to worry about, going over and sharpening my pencil. I don't mind, but it's better than coming like this where you're pointing the pencil more at the paper and wearing that tip off all the time. You'll have a very difficult time when you have wider, softer lines created by your pencil. And so I think that's one of the key elements for drawing fur and feathers and things that need all these wonderful little sharp, uniform, directional lines. And so anyway, I hope maybe that helps just a little bit. And I don't know whether you have any other questions, Jeremy, but
no, I think that clears that up. That's fantastic information. And every animal is so unique, and it would really be a shame to draw a portrait of your pet and miss those unique characteristics that endear them to you. So
yeah, and I know this is more of a descriptive thing. I can't spend a lot of time drawing. It would be a whole video in itself. But I hope that it communicated enough that it can get you to think about, a few of those things that might become great advantages. I think they will become advantages to you if you're willing to practice them and just think about them. And so, anyway, I hope this will help.
Yeah, I think it will. And I know you have a lot more insight. And we've still got one more video that we're going to do with you. And in that video, Darrel's going to touch on another hot topic that we saw in the responses to the survey. And that was getting the right reference image to draw from. A pet can be kind of hard to get a good picture of, especially with all the movement. And another thing we see is friends who want you to draw their pet, and they give you a picture, and it's a really fuzzy, blurry photo they took maybe with their cell phone. And so Darrel's gonna look at that and tell you show you what to look for, and give you some tips and pointers on that. But thank you so much for being with us today, Darrel, and talking with us. It was really a pleasure.
Yeah, well, I appreciate having the opportunity to share, and I hope this really helps.
Yeah, for sure. And we want to hear from you guys. Leave us a comment in the comments box below. And let us know what you thought about this video. Did it clear up some of your questions about drawing unique patterns and markings in your pets and animals? So just feel free to leave us a comment down there, and we'll get back to them as we can.
Yeah, thanks so much for responding too. So it really helps us a lot.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video.
See you later. Bye-bye.